Let's take a look at the circuit diagram for the PIR sensor project. There are just 3 connections that are needed from the PIR sensor to the Raspberry Pi. The convention that I have used on this circuit diagram is the pin to the left on the PIR sensor is the ground pin, the middle pin is the signal pin, and the pin on the right is the VCC pin. This is the typical standard configuration for PIR sensors, but for the PIR sensor that you're using, you'll just want to double check the labeling on the pins to ensure that they correspond to the ground, signal, and VCC pins and make connections accordingly. So the first connection from the ground pin on the PIR sensor goes to pin 6 on the Raspberry Pi. The middle pin, or the signal pin, is connected to pin 7 on the Raspberry Pi. And finally, the VCC pin, or the power pin for the PIR sensor, is connected to one of the 5-volt power pins on the Raspberry Pi, which is pin 2. That is all the connections that we will need for our PIR sensor project. Let's proceed to wire up our circuit. So here's the PIR sensor. When I turn it around, the 3 pins that are exposed, the pin on the left here is the VCC pin, then we have the signal pin in the middle, and the ground pin on the right. So let's first connect the VCC pin. I'm going to take one of my female to female connecting wires. That goes to pin 2 on the Raspberry Pi, which is the 5-volt power pin. The middle pin, which is our signal pin, connect that on the PIR sensor. That signal pin goes to pin 7 on the Raspberry Pi, and pin 7 is the 4th pin down on the left. Finally, our ground pin, I'll connect that on the PIR sensor. And the ground pin on the Raspberry Pi we're using is pin 6. So that's the 3rd pin down on the right. So those are the connections. Everything looks good. We're done with the wiring. Let's proceed now to boot up our Raspberry Pi.